Today, I'm going to explain a sci-fi thriller movie called 12 Monkeys. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens in 2035 as a prisoner named James Cole wakes up in a cell after the warden yelled out his name. It is revealed that in 1996, a group known as the 12 Monkeys released a deadly virus which wiped out almost all of humanity. In the present day, human survivors live beneath the surface under the leadership of a group of scientists, while wild animals wander outside. Currently, James has been chosen for a special mission because of his great memory and observation skills. He is to go back in time to 1996 with the help of a machine that they are currently working on. Once there, James has to find the source of the virus outbreak and collect samples of insects that the scientists will use to create a vaccine. If he's successful, they'll reduce his sentence and help humanity return to the surface. However, James is accidentally teleported to Philadelphia in 1990, where he is captured by the police. Psychiatrist Catherine Rayleigh is then called to the police station, where she finds James chained to the floor. Between the time travel and the beating he's taken from the cops, James's mind isn't exactly clear, so he tries his best to explain that he needs to gather information for an emergency. When he mentions 1996, the psychiatrist corrects him and says it's 1990, meaning the time machine glitched. Catherine patiently hears what he has to say, but cannot comprehend anything. Therefore, she assumes James is mentally ill and takes him to an asylum. There, another patient named Jeffrey gives him a tour of the facility while continuously ranting against the system, corporations, and how humans are destroying the planet. Later, James is taken to see the psychiatrists, and he tries his best to tell them about the virus and the 12 monkeys. The doctors obviously don't believe him, so James says he can prove it with a phone call. However, when he tries the number that the scientists gave him, it's picked up by a mother from a normal household. He realizes that since this is 1990 and not 1996, that number doesn't connect to the proper answering machine yet. The next day, Jeffrey joins James in the common room where the patients watch a news story about a scientist carrying out experiments on animals. They both agree it is cruel, and James says that humanity deserves to be destroyed after all. His crazy friend is shocked, but absolutely loves the idea. Later, Jeffrey shows up with a key that he stole from a guard and puts it in James's hand. He then starts yelling and breaking things to create a distraction, inspiring other patients to act out as well. James, who's under the effect of various medicines, barely makes it to the door. He opens it to leave the main area. Unfortunately, the medicines have made him very sloppy, and he accidentally triggers an alarm. This prompts the guards to immediately come and capture James. He is then tied up in an isolated cell with no exits as a punishment. In the meantime, Catherine explains to other doctors that she has a strange feeling about James. She feels like she knows the guy and has seen him somewhere. Their talk is interrupted by a guard who takes them to the isolated room. To their surprise, James has completely disappeared, which is impossible because the room has no exits except the locked door. On the other hand, James suddenly wakes up alone in a room back in 2035. He is soon taken to the scientists, who play a distorted recording of a woman talking about an army of 12 monkeys. James explains he didn't send that message because he was teleported to the wrong year, but the scientists have no interest in his story and show him a bunch of old pictures. Among them, James recognizes a photo of Jeffrey taken at a rally organized by the 12 monkeys. In the next scene, James is sent back in time so he can gather all the necessary information correctly this time around. Unfortunately, he shows up in the middle of a battle in World War I. He sees his cellmate from 2035, Jose, in the battlefield too. Before James can gather his wits, he is suddenly shot in the leg. He cries out in pain, which triggers yet another jump in time. James is then teleported to 1996 outside a public hall in Baltimore. Inside, Catherine is giving a presentation on a mad soldier from World War I who believed he was a time traveler. She is talking about Jose and has even written a book about patients with such illness. After her speech, she is approached by a red-haired man who introduces himself as Dr. Peters. Unbeknownst to her, he works as a lab assistant for Jeffrey's father, the renowned scientist Dr. Leland. Peter says that humanity's destruction of the environment is the real insanity plaguing the world. After the bizarre conversation, Catherine walks to her car where she is jumped on by James. He apologizes for sneaking up like this, but lies that he has a gun on him. He then forces her to drive him to Philadelphia Philadelphia, as he has some important business there. A few hours later, the duo stops for a breather at a hotel. There, the news shows James as a wanted fugitive in suspicion of kidnapping. He is still holding Catherine hostage by pretending to have a gun, so he once again forces her to hit the road, and they eventually make it to Philadelphia. They then drive around the city until James sees a wall with a 12 Monkeys graffiti on it. Curious, he begins following it, while a reluctant Catherine follows him. At this moment, they are confronted by a hobo with a peculiar, raspy voice. He tells them that nobody can hide because they are tracking the duo thanks to devices hidden in their teeth. Although the hobo sounds ominous, the two completely ignore him and keep following the graffiti. They eventually reach an abandoned theater, which has become a hideout for the homeless guys. Two freaks even attack them, but thanks to James's quick thinking, they manage to escape. On their way out of the building, they snatch a gun from the hobo they saw earlier. As the two are running away, James recognizes a pig statue from the pictures shown by the scientists. The building that has the statue is actually the headquarters of the FAA, or Freedom for Animals Association. They then go inside, and James asks the people about the 12 monkeys while threatening them with his gun. He remembers the scientists showing him a picture of the group's rally, where Jeffrey was also present. So he asks them about Jeffrey, and they admit that they used to work with him. However, when he became an extremist in favor of guerrilla tactics, they cut all ties with him. Jeffrey formed a new group called the 12 Monkeys after that. They also reveal that his father, Dr. Leland, is a famous virologist who experiments on animals. Following this, James grabs an address book from the FAA and forces Catherine to drive him to Leland's mansion. On the way, she sees him struggle and stops the car for a while. Catherine then takes care of the wound he got during the war and removes the bullet. When they reach the mansion, James puts her in the car's boot and goes in alone. In the house, Leland is giving a speech for his dinner guests while Jeffrey pretends to be a well-behaved son. A guard suddenly tells the young man that they found a strange person in the parking lot who claims to know him. This makes Jeffrey curious, and he goes to take a look outside. When he learns that it's James, he pretends not to know him. However, he quickly changes his mind when the latter mentions 12 monkeys. The duo then heads to a room for privacy, where James asks for some virus samples. Upon hearing this, Jeffrey believes that his asylum partner wants to spread it to destroy humanity. However, James quickly makes his intentions clear by attacking him and holding him over the edge of the railing. The guards immediately intervene, but the time traveler manages to run away in the nick of time. Later, he lets Catherine out of the trunk, and she attacks him in frustration. She then tries to contact the police, who are nearby, but James once again runs away. He soon reaches a lake, where he vanishes into thin air. In the next scene, James wakes up in 2035 and finds the scientists singing a song for him, with a beautiful painting behind them. Since he has found the origin of the virus, they promise that he can leave as soon as he's feeling better. However, all the hopping around in time has taken its toll on James. He snaps, starts laughing like a maniac, and eventually concludes that he's insane. This forces the scientists to inject him with a sedative. Moments later, James wakes up in a cell and hears a raspy voice, which sounds familiar to the hobo he met earlier. The voice reveals that James's real wish is to see the sky, the ocean, and to be with her. Back in 1996, Catherine receives a call from a detective who explains the bullet from James's wound has been analyzed. The ballistic reports indicate it was fired sometime before 1920. This freaks Catherine out, so she rushes to check her research on the World War I soldier who proclaimed to be from the future. In one of the photos from that era, she finds a hazy image of James and finally believes his story. She then remembers Jeffrey Goins, a patient at the mental asylum in Philadelphia where James was also admitted in 1990. Jeffrey used to continuously talk about bringing down the system and ending human cruelty on animals. Catherine does some digging and learns that she's actually the son of Dr. Leland Goins. So she calls the virologist and informs him that his son might steal the virus. Leland promises to look into the matter and asks his assistant, Dr. Peters, to upgrade their security measures. Elsewhere, in 2035, James tries to convince the scientists to send him back to 1996. They give him a pop quiz about the virus, making him list all the locations and chronology in which it appeared. James passes it without issue and is eventually sent back to 1996. Meanwhile, Catherine is outside the FAA, trying to find a way in. She meets the activist group, who reveal that they are still working with Jeffrey, and he's their leader. At this moment, James also shows up and immediately tells Catherine that he wants to surrender because he's accepted. He's crazy. Catherine then drags him away to a hotel where she pays for only a few hours lodging. This makes the receptionist assume she's a call girl, so he discreetly calls the neighborhood pimp. In the room, Catherine tries to convince James that he is not crazy. However, his mind is tired from all the time hopping, anything, and he simply wants to have a normal life with her. Just as the two hug, the neighborhood pimp suddenly bursts into the room. He accuses her of working in his territory.
It's one of Pepper Jack's best hoes!
And grabs her by the hair. This enrages James so much that he attacks the guy and forcibly locks him in the bathroom. He then suddenly remembers what the raspy-voiced hobo had told him earlier. James connects the dots and realizes there is a tracker placed in his teeth, and the scientists are tracking his movement using it. Hence, he goes to the bathroom and removes all his teeth by violently punching them.
I promise you can have my hose!
Once he's done, the two leave the hotel and run away from there. At this point, Catherine is sure James is from the future, but she still wants to check whether there is actually a risk of a virus outbreak, so she excuses herself for a while and gets into a payphone booth away from James. She calls the number he tried back in 1990 and leaves a vague message about an army of 12 monkeys. However, when the person on the other side says that they are a carpet cleaning company, she gets relieved. If the threat of the virus outbreak was real, the phone would have been picked up by someone who knew about the time traveler. Catherine then returns back to James and reveals that she checked the number. To her surprise, he correctly repeats her message word by word. It's because her message about Army of 12 Monkeys in a scrambled voice was played to him by the 2035 scientists before he made his second visit. It is now clear to them that the outbreak is real and that they can do nothing to stop it. So they decide to head to Florida Keys to spend their last days before the plague with each other. Catherine then buys some new clothes and wigs to disguise them from the cops. Later, on their way to the airport, their taxi gets stuck in a traffic jam. The driver mentions that it is caused by some organization that has freed all the animals from zoos across the city. He then plays the radio, which reports that a scientist's son is behind this chaos. Furthermore, this crazy guy has locked up his dad in a zoo cage. Upon hearing this, it finally dawns on the duo that the 12 Monkeys' real mission was simply protesting animal abuse and wasn't related to the virus that Dr. Leland had created. Nonetheless, they decide to continue with their trip to the Florida Keys. At the airport, the police are handing out copies of James's picture to all the employees. When the two arrive, James realizes this is the place from his recurring dream. Catherine then goes to get the tickets, while he uses a payphone to send another message to the scientists. He tells them it wasn't the 12 monkeys who released the virus, and that he doesn't want to return back to 2035. Afterward, James goes to the bathroom to fix his mustache, where he is suddenly confronted by Jose. The latter confirms the scientists got the new message and hands him a gun. He now has to shoot a man with red hair and a metallic briefcase that contains the vials of the deadly virus. If James fails to cooperate with the mission, Jose will be forced to shoot Catherine. The time traveler is certainly enraged by the order, but he has no choice but to agree. Meanwhile, at the newsstand, Catherine notices a newspaper picture of Dr. Leland in his lab. Standing by his side is his assistant, Dr. Peters, the same red-headed man who had confronted her in Baltimore. To her surprise, she bumps into Dr. Peters at the airport, who has a strange-looking metal suitcase. He reveals that he is traveling to all the major cities across the globe on work purposes. Upon hearing this, Catherine finally connects the dots and runs to James. She tells him everything and warns him about the impending danger. James immediately springs into action and whips out his gun to shoot Dr. Peters. But before he can finish his mission, the cops notice him and open fire, killing him on the spot. In the final scene, an anxious Dr. Peters opens the vials during security checkup and releases the virus. He then boards the plane and takes his seat next to a woman with a glass of champagne. This woman is one of the scientists from 2035, meaning that they know who spread the virus, but she is not here to stop it from spreading. She smiles at Peters and reveals that she works for insurance, meaning that she and the other scientists intend to make money from the outbreak by controlling the manufacturing of the vaccine. This makes it clear that James was simply a pawn in their larger plan.